Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Conservationists Assemble podcast, the show that seeks to unite Earth's mightiest advocates in a mission to ensure a future for our planet's incredible habitats and its awesome inhabitants. Today's episode is all about the dhole, an endangered species of wild dog found throughout Asia. I am your host, Johnny Bloxham, and I invite you to come with me and our expert guest on a journey to discuss the conservation of this species and the collaborative work of zoos and the Dhole Conservation Fund in laying a foundation for their wild future. Join the podcast and our expert guest, Chelsea Davis, as she takes us on a whistle-stop tour throughout the life and trials of these awesome canids, including how we can all support efforts contributing to ensuring a future for these awesome animals. Please welcome Chelsea as she joins the ranks of the Conservationists Assemble initiative to share her stories, expertise and passion on dholes. Chelsea, thank you for joining us on the podcast today. How's it going?
It's going good. Just thawing out from cold Washington, US. But happy to be on today.
You've been out and about already with some of the animals this morning, but you're warming up now while we're here to discuss all things dhole.
Yep, ready to do it.
Great, yeah, me too. And so you are not only an animal carer, but you work for the Dhole Conservation Fund. So first and foremost, could you tell us a little bit about dholes, please?
Yeah, so dholes are a medium-sized dog, wild dog that lives in Southeast Asia. Their main home range right now is kind of isolated to India, but Nepal has a thriving population we're discovering, as does Thailand and some of the surrounding countries as well. China is a bit of an unknown population right now. They have a reddish coat or rust red. It can also go all the way to orange to a deep red. Size-wise, they're about the same as a border collie, weighing in about 50 pounds or 22 kilos. Pack size varies on where they're living, but most of the time it's 5 to 7 related adults or individuals, typically the breeding pair, maybe another adult that helps with raising pups and helping with hunting, and then the pups of the year. They tend to disperse around 2 to 3 years of age, going off in either pairs or singles to start their own packs. They're able to take down prey as small as Indian hare, so think of a small rabbit, all the way up to they have been noted to try and take gaur or banteng, which are wild bison and cow of the region. Historical evidence shows that there may have been groups or packs of dholes that came together to create what's called a clan, which is up to 30 individuals. They have been historically known to apparently back down tigers. We don't see that really much in the scientific kind of literature. However, dholes are known to mob tigers when they see them, which is mainly create a very wide circle, chirping and barking and doing what's called a tiger cry, which is a special call they make for as an alarm. Basically to tell everyone, hey, there's a tiger here, keep clear. But they will tree leopards, which is pretty impressive for a cat that can literally carry its body weight up a tree. So that's dholes in a nutshell, really.
Yeah, a lot to digest there, and certainly, something that I'm going to jump on and kind of pick apart. The first one is just the mental image of them going after a gaur. Because my understanding is gaur is one of, if not the biggest breed of cattle. And
Yes.
so for a dog, even a group of dogs the size of a border collie, to just even attempt it it's quite the image.
Yeah, so gaur would be pretty much the max end of their size that they would try and take down. It's figured the way that they do get these gaurs, they typically do what a lot of wild canids do, which is get their prey to move.
Hmm.
And what they're looking for is an animal that might be limping, might be sick, and that's the one the pack's gonna kind of pick on. Now, wolves and African wild dogs have the luxury of typically being able to hunt in wide open areas when they're taking down these larger prey. Dholes don't always have this. So one of their evolutionary adaptations is a communication, which is a whistle. So they're sometimes called the whistling hunters. And because they really do use these whistles to locate each other during a hunt and kind of tell each other where they're at and what's happening. The rest of the hunts are pretty similar. They'll go for the hind end until they kind of wear their prey down. If there's water available, they will run a gaur or sandbar and chital deer or axis deer, as they're sometimes named, are more size appropriate prey for a pack of dholes. So that's typically what they're going to do. But the style of kill is the same. Try and drive them to water. And the water does a few different things. One, it slows the prey down. It's harder for them to swim. Two, it kind of disarms them. So hooves are a big, big weapon on ungulates. Lots of force behind it. They can crack a skull of a dhole with a really well-laid kick. Water really slows down that kicking, so it kind of takes that weapon from them. The other is water helps the poor animal bleed out as well. So it aids the dholes a lot, and they're excellent swimmers. So for them, water is not an issue. It actually is a big help. They also will realize if the prey is able to get into water and is still able to fight them off, it's just not worth pursuing. So it helps them kind of slow down their hunt. They're like, all right, we're going to waste more energy than we're going to get from this, and they move on. We saw this a lot in Thailand, the sandbar deer, which are kind of a semi-aquatic deer. They like the water. They will run towards water as soon as they see dholes and then turn around and fight.
Wow.
So water is not a death sentence to the prey
No.
animals. We always like to tell people they have just as much chance of escaping. We don't quite know what the kill rate is for dholes. I imagine it's probably pretty low, somewhere more to wolves and African wild dogs than to say, some of the big cat species, which have a bit higher of a hunt success rate.
So, obviously, a very social species, but would you say that dholes are quite an adaptable species, but also intelligent?
They are very intelligent, and adaptive is probably the one reason why I would not cross them off conservation list. Be it global warming, habitat change, they probably are some of the most adjustable animals. They do occupy everything from tropical forest, boreal forest, alpine forest, open grasslands. The only real ecosystem we haven't seen them be able to occupy is deserts. If there's open grass, they're able to hunt down prey. It's pretty much, if prey is available, they'll figure out how to adapt. Their other big kind of hurdle is humans. We haven't seen them really adjust despite living along human habitations for a few millennia now. They don't really seem to have adapted to human development. But what that seems to be doing is they're pushing into different niches that they historically haven't been seen. And things like tea groves, plantations and stuff like that, where herbivores aren't exactly welcome, but dholes, which do not pose a risk to humans, there's never been a documented fatality from wild dholes. So some people actually welcome them now onto their plantations to try and limit the herbivore kind of destruction. So it's a weird thing where we don't know much about it. It's one of the areas that the IUCN would love to investigate more. However, it's kind of lower priority compared to some of the other things. Their intelligence is something that's always kind of fascinated me. So I worked with captive dholes for 3 years, and their individual personalities is also very fascinating. Even in the same pack, you'll have a very bold male who has no problem coming up to the fence and kind of doing a chatter bark at you to back off. And you might have another female who, while you're distracted by him, is coming around trying to take your food bucket from you. So they're very smart in that regards. I don't think a lot of times in zoological communities, we give them enough kind of credit towards that. Because they are canines, you can kind of go in with them. We kind of are like, training isn't really needed. Like you can just go in and, maybe net them if you have to. But I found they worked really well for crating, which allowed us to kind of move our packs around, which was great to not have to really stress them out with a dart or a net. And then this also allowed us whenever a rare instance of a solo dhole. So dholes, like you said, very social. we tried to keep them together, but sometimes medical situations or other instances that maybe were out of our control would mean that an animal had to be solo. Because of that, I was able to teach. We did have a single male for a bit. He learned how to do puzzles really quickly. He was able to pick up on human cues, so we actually did some agility with him, made a teeter-totter, made some platforms for him to jump up on. He even went through tunnels. My favorite was teaching him how to do tug-of-war. So he loved to play tug-of-war for a bit. He is much stronger than I gave him credit for. So he pulled me off my feet quite a few times, and I'm a fairly decent heavy person.
So yeah, showing how, again, adaptable zoos are in terms of how they care for animals and still provide, that stimulation and obviously that exercise to keep an individual in an unfortunate situation mentally and physically stimulated.
Yes. So, I mean, I'm happy to say, any chance we got, we did end up getting two females that were very compatible with him.
Hmm.
And it turned out great. We had another pack. So, and once that happened, he had no interest in me anymore.
So in terms of obviously kind of going back to the hunting techniques of say the population in Thailand
Mhm.
compared to, for example, populations in India, would you say that the hunting techniques are similar? Should a population in India come across a deer, would they still chase them into the water, or are we seeing kind of differences?
Most of that evidence comes from India, so we just verified that we saw it also in Thailand. So it seems to be a kind of preferred hunting methods. We don't get a lot of visuals on hunting in places like Nepal, which are more mountainous. So I imagine they may hunt them towards denser vegetation, which seems
Hmm.
counterintuitive. But what we have noticed with dholes in particular, during the rut season for the male deer is primarily what they target. Those big antlers that are used for sparring male on male slow them down in dense vegetation. So we will see dholes kind of run male deer into that denser vegetation to slow them down and kind of get them tangled up. Versus the females, no headgear, they're able to kind of run through these vegetation a little easier. So we have seen kind of a skewed number towards male deer killed during rut compared to what you would expect for females.
That's so interesting, and that's so cool. And I know we've only been talking for like 15 minutes, but I'm already like obsessed with some of this information. It's so cool. Just yeah, blowing my mind. I actually wanted to take it back to how some of the communities in and around Dhole habitat are actually having a fondness for them in the form of natural pest control, like you
Mhm.
said. So that's also really cool that local communities are seeing the benefits to having these species around when, like you say, there are maybe more iconic species in their environment that certainly get a lot more attention.
Yeah, we're starting to see that. It's really just at the tipping point of getting communities involved. Unfortunately, there's quite a lot of myth or lack of cultural interest in dholes. So, a lot of species, if you look back historically, the culture has either it's a villain, it could be a cultural god, it could be a deity. Dholes have none of that.
Hmm.
They're not really mentioned in a lot of stories. So, except for the Jungle Book, where unfortunately Mowgli's pack is preparing for war against the Red Dog, which is Dholes.
Right.
We're really just seeing this cultural interest and buy-in in the last 10, 20 years, really, as ecology is starting to come back. The best example is, I want to say in Bhutan, they had issues with Eurasian hog. So, wild boar, they can survive anywhere. And as a lot of the native prey, I mean, predator species, tigers and leopards were killed off, Dole's kind of lived in this kind of weird limbo where, yes, there was a bounty, but they're kind of small. They do take livestock, but they're a lot of work to try to capture. And so they kind of persisted there. And what they're seeing is those are the only predator now taking down these wild hogs. And Eurasian hogs can be, if population left unchecked, can be pretty detrimental to the landscape. From uprooting crops to damaging fencing that's holding chickens and sometimes even eating chickens. So to see these dholes coming in and realizing this is the primary prey species I have, they will utilize it. There are some of the few animals that are able to take down wild boar. I mean, I know tigers can, leopards will attempt, but they're not an easy animal. So species like jackal don't go after them. Clouded leopards don't really go after them. So you need an animal that's tough, rugged, and a little cunning to be able to take down a boar. Because also they go in groups, so sometimes you need reinforcements to watch your
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, little tanks, aren't they? Boars,
Yep.
anything like that. Just they don't have a fear complex because they don't need it.
They don't need it. No, it's either I'll run through it or I'll outrun it, but there's or I'll fight it.
Yeah.
If there is a species designed to survive all environments, I'm pretty sure if you drop some pigs off into Antarctica, they'd even figure out a way to survive.
That's an interesting concept. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure they probably
I
would.
hope no one tries that.
No, don't. Anyone out there, don't. That's not what we're
Don't try that.
saying. It's all hypothetical. So we've I think had a really great insight into what defines a dhole. In terms of why we're talking about them, what classifications are we talking about, and kind of the population trends for them?
So unfortunate dholes are labeled endangered. Their population sits at about 2,000 mature individuals. So when the IUCN Red List, which is kind of the authority on conservation and population numbers, tries to put a number to species, it can be a little difficult, especially when you have an animal that's in a pack like a dhole. So typically, if you're getting a camera trap footage, all you can really confirm is presence and not presence. Luckily, African wild dogs have individual patterns in photos. You can be like, oh yeah, these are individuals that we haven't seen. So we use a lot of our population dynamics based off of their modeling for habitat use, number supporting, and stuff like that. So rather than say there are X amount of individuals, the IUCN is like, well, we know there are probably this many mature individuals. And that really is more of an important number than complete individual numbers. And the reason why is those mature individuals are going to be the ones that are breeding and contributing to future genetics. The others are required to help those to make those numbers. But really what we need to see for population trend is the mature number. But there's a large variance in that too. So 2,000 is what we use. It's about the high end. It could be as low as 900 and high as 2,200. 22,000, 22, yeah, 2,200, 22,000, the mature count is even larger of a variance, possibly 4,000. Again, there's a question mark up to 10,000. I would really estimate that more on the lower end, where we rarely see a full population over 600 in any particular pocket. So right now the population is trending downwards as of the last kind of result. But there is good news. We're seeing dholes in areas that we haven't counted before. So areas that have been typically kind of more isolated. And the way we're finding these is actually through big cat initiatives. So scat samplings for snow leopards revealed dholes that were like, oh, we didn't know there were dholes in that area, but this is a fresh dhole scat. We're seeing more interesting countries that didn't have the ability to look into this. So like Cambodia is turning out to maybe have a bigger population than we anticipated. So it's great for population numbers, but what we're also now seeing is it's severely scattered, and there's not a lot of connectivity. So even though we may not be looking at the low numbers we were expecting, we are now seeing that there's going to have to still be some human intervention to allow these populations to either move around naturally through corridors, or through human intervention of actually moving these animals from different area to area. Again, Big Cat initiatives really help with that as they create these tiger corridors in India to help move. Other species are also looking at that. Hopefully Cambodia will start looking with they have a wild elephant population. Again, elephants need to be able to move and migrate. So hopefully that also opens up corridors for dholes. So one of the biggest things with these guys is just we don't know enough to really figure out, I'm telling you these population numbers and there's a 2,000, difference in mature animal and 6,000 difference in individuals. So just gain that baseline of we think it's more in this ballpark really helps. And to figure out where they're still present. So, I mean, Southeast Asia, I don't think gets a whole lot of international interest sometimes outside of the iconic species. So to see more and more kind of support go into understanding and researching not just dholes, but habitat use, conservation use, and figuring out how to work with, within cultural acceptance and understanding to try and make a nice coexistence while also not, impeding on the locals in those areas.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, you've highlighted the importance of continued research and perseverance in conservation there. And yeah, kind of the key actions and initiatives that still need to happen to not even, start recovering the species, but just allow us to fully understand the status as it is so that you can then make those actions.
Because, yeah, it's hard if you don't know where you're starting, because it's like, if we reevaluate in 5 years and it's like, well, the numbers haven't changed. It's like, well, have the numbers not changed because our initial number was bad, or is everything we're doing not actually helping? And we need to reevaluate. So just to be able to define kind of the starting plane, which, the last time the numbers were developed, I think was 20. I don't want to say 5, but maybe it was 2005. Maybe it was 15. 2015, I'm gonna say. I'd have to go back and look. So it's like that's our base. And it's like you can improve on those numbers, and even if they don't change, but you're able to say we at least now know we're very confident with this, you can then keep building. So I'm not saying the starting point we have is terrible and it means absolutely nothing. It's just it's a starting place, you have to start from somewhere.
Yeah, I suppose, I mean, at the very least, at least they're in the conversation.
Exactly, yes. And the IUCN does have a Dhole working group. So, there are people who this is always present on their mind. They are some of the best researchers I know in those regions. Thailand, Nepal, India, I know is always represented in those talks. And it went from the first in-person meeting in 2018. There was, I want to say under 20 of us. I was able to go to that one. It was in Thailand. And it doubled for the 2023 meeting. And I wasn't even there, so I didn't get to count as a placeholder. So lots of great information coming out from there. A lot of enthusiasm too. The first one was very much like knit and grit. We got to figure out these problems. The second one, a lot of that, but there was a lot more social interaction as well between the different researchers. They made t-shirts this time, which really helps, camaraderie. And there's still a lot of communication back and forth between all the groups. So to see that group not only grow, but become more kind of cohesive as well as they do has been a great indicator that the Dhole does have a pretty strong group, small but mighty, to try and save it from extinction, which I don't think the Dhole would ever go extinct, but it would be nice to have a healthier, robust population.
Absolutely. And you obviously mentioned kind of how the key species in and around Southeast Asia are getting a lot of attention and quite rightly so, the support that they need. But what, now that we're starting to see that support for dholes coming through, be it government or in situ or ex situ organisations, what are the range of support that we're seeing for Dhole conservation in terms of its members?
So, I mean, you have everything from much more education. So, people wanting to actually learn about dholes. So, when I was in Thailand, there was a sign that said, "Warning, dholes are in the park. They can be aggressive, danger towards humans." Like, well, none of that is true. So, you move further north in Nepal, it was the same thing. However, there's been groups that go out. Friends of Nature Nepal comes to mind. They actually go out and talk to these communities that live in Dhole territories, and it does two things. One, they're getting a presence survey. So, have you seen dholes? Where have you seen dholes? How many have you seen? And then also, what's your opinion on dholes? How do dholes negatively affect you? How do dholes positively affect you? And they've taken this back and they're actually creating educational programs for not just kids, but also adults, so the general public who are interested in coming and learning about dholes, dhole ecology, how to help your livestock and everything with dholes. We also see that there is more insurance now between, government officials and the normal citizens on being reimbursed for dhole livestock depredations. So if that happens, there seems to be an increase. You have organizations like mine, the Dhole Conservation Fund, that has created World Dhole Day to just kind of create more of an awareness for the species. And it started as a very small little social media blurb. And this year we've gotten a lot more interest. We've been asked to do a few blog postings. Last year there was a news article thanks to I can't believe I can't remember their names. One of the NGOs in India that's done amazing dhole work. They were able to get an article in one of the international papers for World Dhole Day. We're seeing a lot more children's interest, doing a lot of drawings and school activities for this. And I always get people who are like, well, that's great, but where does that get you? And it's like, well, I remember in the 90s being a kid and drawing pandas. Like that was the newest thing, was I had never heard of a panda until then. And then next thing I know, zoos are starting to get pandas because kids want to see pandas, which, then China starts to do a lot more of their reproductive work and a lot more conservation work. So it kind of snowballs. If you can
Mm-hmm.
get it big enough, it starts rolling. And that's kind of the whole idea behind World Dhole Day, is to get more interest behind the species. Because in North America right now, there are only, I want to say, 4 holders of Asian dholes in zoos. I'm a I'm really in favor of captive animals in facilities, because not everyone's going to get the luxury of going to see a tiger in India, nor
Mm-hmm.
should everyone.
Yeah.
If you think about the amount of flights and gas and then habitat, and it's just not possible. And yes, there's TVs, there's documentaries, but there's something about actively seeing, smelling, hearing, and that's different than a television. I think it's because TV nowadays is so easy to fake what's on a
Mm-hmm.
screen versus what's physically in front of you, that it's even more important nowadays to have that captive representation. Europe does have a much larger dhole population, and it is well managed, but I would love to see it, of course, grow.
Yes.
As always, these captive populations kind of act as an arc as well for if something catastrophic out in the wild happened, you have the ability to use these captive animals for reintroduction. And I think nowadays we're past the, well, can you reintroduce captive carnivores? We've seen it happen in Africa. We've seen it here in the United States. They're starting to do it also with some other species around the world. So it can be done. There's case studies to back it up. Um, Again, wild populations are always better to conserve than have to rely on that. And that's why I call it kind of the arc. It's the last ditch attempt. Um, but also zoos that hold those animals tend to be more interested in their research and conservation as well. So selfish reasons to have dholes in more zoos is to get them more interested in some of our project partners and helping support them so they can continue their work.
No, absolutely, and yeah, you and I both massive, zoo advocates for good, reputable organisations,
Exactly.
and yeah,
Yes.
I think, we're in such a place now where it's so easy to there is, like, say, evidence of the positive work that these organizations are doing, be it, yes, supplementing wild populations, which is we are only going to start seeing more frequently now because we've got models from other species that can be applied.
Do that.
But also, yeah, they're high welfare, you know they
Yep.
are, like, say, incredibly important for research, and what a lot of what we would know
We
about
wouldn't
wild
know.
animals we wouldn't know.
No, I mean, a lot of people always, well, put radio collar on a doll. And it's like, well, what drugs do we use to do that? And
Yeah.
captive dolls have allowed us to figure out much safer and more efficient cocktails to do that.
Hmm.
Uh, Social structure, we see a lot out in the wild, but when they run out into the bushes, we don't get to see some of those behaviors that we are able to see in the zoo.
Yep.
So, and I mean, like you said, some of these animals, you got scimitar horned oryx returning to Chad, which would never have happened. They were extinct in the wild. Pravoski's wild horses now. I mean, Eastern Europe is getting covered with them, which is great because they
Yeah.
were extinct. And it's like now we have that ability to go ahead and return them. Um, so I know there's a few places in Africa looking to do that with cheetahs and
Hmm.
of course there's some species you probably don't want to try it with, but there's others that it does work, and it's good to have that kind of that safety
Yeah.
net of just in case.
Definitely. And so, obviously, to highlight World Dole Day for our listeners, when is World Dole Day?
World Dole Day is on May 28th. It used to kind of correspond with International Whistling Day because they are the whistling hunter.
I like that.
But it looks like Whistling Day got moved or
Yeah.
removed. It's hard to tell, but rather than try and change it again, we just decided, May 28th works. It's a good kind of middle of the year without getting too far into the summer break for the Northern Hemisphere.
Hmm.
So we try and do a lot of promotions. Any of the facilities that house doles that want to do event, or anyone who wants to do an event, we ask them to kind of reach out. We can help them with a social media packet. We're creating a few fun activities this year. We put out a dole cocktail and mocktail list. So yeah, some of these for the adults are based off of drinks from the region that doles can be found. The mocktails are more just kind of nice dole puns.
Hmm.
So we have the hair of the dole as one of them, and dole whips. So
Nice.
just fun things to kind of get people talking about them, even if it's not directly dole related. We're coming up with an activity for Jeopardy, Dole Jeopardy. So we'll have a little kind of info sheet people can read beforehand, see what they retain from Jeopardy, more designed for school kids, but
Hmm.
if you've had a few Dole cocktails, it could be a
Yeah.
lot of fun too.
Yeah, yeah. No, I'm all on board for Dole cocktails as well. So I'll certainly be looking up some of those after we've finished our conversation here today. Um, so you kind of mentioned it earlier about how the government are kind of introducing a levy to reimburse farmers who may have lost their livestock. Would you say that is one of the major threats to the dole is kind of retaliation from livestock farmers?
It's one of them. I'd say the biggest one would definitely be habitat destruction, or use. So unfortunately, as people move out of the cities, or, they push farming instances further and further out. So people are using lands that historically weren't always used for agriculture. But then retaliation is a big one. We actually don't really know how big of an issue that is. Um, Most places now, doles are protected, so to kill them now could actually cause a fine. The livestock insurance and reimbursement is helping, but it's also not easily accessible to some of these more rural communities. So it's a new system. Governments are still trying to figure it out to make sure people aren't abusing it, but the people who actually need it are also able to access it. We're also seeing the potential for disease issues with feral dogs. Seems to be a potentially big problem. A lot of these regions have rural feral dogs that we're now realizing are actually going deeper into the wild, the national parks that are kind of the heartland for the Dhole. One collared study shows that this pack of feral dogs were actually going in and hunting some of the spotted deer that the Dholes rely on.
Sure.
And prey density is probably the best way to dictate if habitat's going to support dholes. So to lose the prey from either overhunting, poaching, or these feral dogs is detrimental to dholes as well, even if disease turns out not to be an issue. We have had cases, unfortunately, of dholes turning up with rabies. Typically, these are the cases that make the news because they go into town and they try and bite people. Again, that's not the dole's natural behavior. That is unfortunately side effect of rabies or distemper causing the animal to act in an unnatural way. So those would be kind of the main issues we have is habitat destruction or limited habitat for doles. The retaliation is still a big one. Potential for disease vectors from feral dogs, and then depletion of prey, especially since a lot of people are going for the large antlered, prey species, which is the preferred one for dholes.
Yeah.
But luckily, a lot of people are now starting to realize we have to start reintroducing some of these prey species, not just for human aesthetics and our own recreation with hunting, but also for the predators that rely on those. So,
And on the note of kind of feral dogs, genetically, is there any risk of hybridization between?
no, so that's the one nice thing. Dholes are coon alpinus, so they are in the dog family, but they are not in canis. So they're a completely different species. There is some stories that dholes have crossed with dogs or even wolves. It doesn't appear that that is actually a potential risk.
Okay.
Again, they are closer related to African wild dogs compared to, say, wolves or jackals. So the genetic risk is minimal. That also just being social, they would not really interact with these feral dogs.
Sure.
So luckily we don't have to worry about that.
Yeah, that is certainly a silver lining.
Silver lining, yeah.
So I think we've kind of given a really good insight into their background, what people who aren't necessarily directly involved with the Doles can do to get involved in terms of World Dole Day. So now we just kind of want to learn a bit about what they mean to you. So when did you first know that you were going to get involved? And maybe you didn't know you was going to get involved with Doles, but when, did you start
Where
seeing
did the
that?
kind of weird fascination with them
Yeah.
start? So I went to college for animal science, and one of our classes was a welfare and ethics class.
Mhm.
And it was supposed to be on domestic animals. There was no wildlife major at the time, so I decided this was the class I was gonna do a little research, and the project I actually chose to write my paper on was reintroduction of carnivores and the ethical and welfare implications, both for the animal and the human aspect. I did terrible in the paper. But apparently that was not what she wanted. She wanted purely husbandry based. So not my evidence wasn't bad. It was just not what she wanted. It was off topic. And the cases I chose were closer to home because there was a lot more evidence to support it. And that was for red wolves and Mexican gray wolves in the US. But while I was researching this, I found a book that was Canids of the World, and I was flipping through it. And literally in this book that was about that thick, there was one half page, and it just said Dhole. I was like, what is it? I never heard of it. And wild canids had been if you ask people when I was growing up, oh yeah, it's Chelsea, she's a wolf girl. She loves wolves, she loves coyotes, anything canid. I learned about African wild dogs really quickly. So I was very confused why I did not know what a dhole was. And I read that page and I was like, all right. And Thank God Google was around at that time. Tried to Google Dole, and only one book came up called The Whistling Hunter, and it was from the 70s. And our school librarian was able to get it for us. And I read that cover to cover 3 or 4 times and was just absolutely amazed by these. Could not find anything else on them. Toronto at the time had a few of them, but my mom was not going to take me to Canada to go see Doles. And so it kind of just fizzled out at that point. Fast forward to about 5 years, I ended up working at a wolf center in San Diego. And my boss was like, hey, we're going to go down to the San Diego Zoo Safari Park to see their training for their tigers. I was like, okay, they're lions. I'm like, all right. And they're doles. And I was like, wait, we're going to see their doles? Because I know they're off exhibit. And so the public couldn't see them. She goes, yeah, are you interested? I'm like, I am very interested. I showed up that day with a camera. Again, I was going to take notes for our training. Camera, notepad. I was writing everyone's name down, and I absolutely fell in love with the species at that moment. The first time I saw them, they were spinning, jumping. It was feeding time and training time, so they were excited. You could tell they were a little hesitant because they were like, we don't know you. You're not someone that's normally here, but our normal trainer's here. So, and it was funny because we actually get all the way to the end. And there's this male who was right up the fence, just completely focused, and he lets out this scream. I was like, I've never heard an animal make that noise. And they're like, that's serious. He's not normal. Turns out he's slightly deaf. So he doesn't quite realize he's making this sound. And it would be ironic that 5 years later, I would actually end up get to work at that facility with that particular dole. And he is one of my absolute favorites. He's kind of the reason why I created World Dole Day, was to remember him. He passed away in May, ironically, on this just before the second World Dole Day that we were celebrating as an organization. But he's actually the logo for World Dole Day. You'll see he has a little crimped ear. And at that point, I was like, once I started working around the doles full time, I was like, I need to do something. There is a group of keepers, not just here, but I've started connecting with other ones across the US and in Europe and even in Asia, and they all want to do something for their species. There's just no outlet. And I was like, you know what? I've had some training. If I fail, I fail, but I can't make the situation worse. So that was kind of the motivation of why not? Let's do it. So I have friends that are kind of in different areas of nonprofit work. From one does research, one does financials. I'm like, I got the passion. You guys can rein me in. Let's do this. And that's kind of how the whole passion for doles and dole conservation worked. I took a trip out to Thailand because there was a researcher doing with Earthwatch doing collaring, and that's how I met Dr. Nooch. I cannot say her name. I know her as Dr. Nooch. Very nice, based out of the Smithsonian. And she has become a great ally and friend for dole conservation. She heads up the IUCN Dole group. So taking that trip was a complete fluke to meet her. I knew she was going to be on it, but I didn't know she'd actually be there and that we would mesh as well as we did. And so that was kind of how I was able to get in with a lot of the different researchers. They all have my email now, and they know if they need weird funding. That's kind of what Dole Conservation does. We can't fund whole projects, but if it's like our freezer that we thought was going to last for this whole season just died, yeah, we can provide that. Or I want to go fly and present this paper at Oxford, but our grant doesn't allow for travel. Yeah, we can do that. So we do like these small grants that are just, we're trying to do bigger ones, but you can imagine trying to fundraise for an animal that no one's even heard of is a little difficult. But yeah, that was just kind of those doles at the park really helped spear my spirit towards it. There's a few still around, but quite a few of them have sadly passed away. But I still remember them every day. I've named a few of my pets after them to keep their memories alive. So they're quite a lot of, they were lots of fond memories with those guys. I spent a lot of days training with them, watching their social interactions. And then you would hear them do a little scream and you'd be like, all right, who's down at the dole pens there? Is it meant to be there? They recognize people.
Yeah.
So
No, yeah, your passion certainly translates. And yeah, going back to kind of the topic of funding elements of conservation. I did an episode with Peter from Painted Dog Conservation, and he said exactly the same from kind of his mindset of who is funding the conservation there. That yeah, everyone wants to be funding the stuff that the radio collar, but actually the funding for who's paying the electricity bill that day,
Yeah.
or a freezer or a is actually something that he finds much more valuable, or just as valuable.
As valuable. Yeah. So those are the things we kind of look for. I prefer to make partnerships with programs. So that way they can just email me instead of this long form. Now, granted, when new people approach, it's like I have to, vet them and make sure that this is something that's gonna be around for a while. But yeah, it always seems to be the like, oh yeah, we have someone who wants to buy trail cameras, collars, the medication, the software, but no one wants to buy the computer. No one wants to, pay for the base camp or the gas to get there. It's like those things we understand. I've done field projects. I've tried to, I've done my own field work, and it's like that kind of is how the work gets done.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
rather than make them have to blindfold it into these larger grants that they're writing. Um, I'm always that person that's like, yeah, if we have the money, we'll make it work. If we don't have the money, I'll try and find it.
Yeah, and certainly, hopefully we'll get to a point where, the dole is certainly much more publicly aware that
Yeah.
will only become easier with time. So Chelsea, you've given us a great insight into the background on the dole. Could you just, talk us through what your favourite part of your role is? Because clearly you enjoy all of it, but is there something that you really look forward to in your role?
I know a lot of people will probably be like, "Oh, she must love the travel." I'm well traveled, so I know too many airports, and I'm quite happy sometimes to just be at work or at home. So I do the Dole conservation kind of on the side. It is completely run by volunteers, so of course I need a job to actually support my other aspects of my life.
Mhm.
My favorite is honestly either doing interviews like this where I get to talk about doles and the my passion behind them, or lately I've been getting a lot of emails from either parents or kids themselves saying, "Hey, I'm doing a report on doles to my middle school," and it's like, "Cool, let me send you some stickers," or "Yeah, let me know. Do you need any help? Do you need photos?" All the way to college students, like, "Hey, I'm looking for this research paper." I have so many papers downloaded onto my computer that I can do a quick search, and it's like, well, how'd you get this paper? It's 25 years old. Don't worry, I have the time to look and find this stuff. So I really love being able to support people's interest in learning about doles. And I'm finding that's a much more important role. I wanted to be a researcher. I wanted to be out in the field. I wanted to be the person. I'm like, I live in the United States. I would have to fly. I would have to adjust. I would have to learn the language. Yeah, that would be awesome. But that is not what I'm best set up for. I'm
Mhm.
best set up trying to get people interested, trying to get people the support they need to do those projects who are already there, who are already on the ground, who can already do the work. Plus, that will last a lot longer. If they can build something there that's theirs and get community buy-in, which will go much faster with someone already there than me coming in and being like, "I'm going to teach you everything I know about those, even though I've never lived here and I don't know anything about what you're doing." Hopefully that builds something so much stronger that even if the Dole Conservation Fund has to close or when I pass away, there's still something there that's helping that community. So I really like being behind the scenes, supporting education, pretty much a gopher. I like doing it. Like you said, I like doing everything. It's just I think people get the wrong idea that I'm out in the field doing these
Mhm.
projects. No, I'm supporting our project partners who do that. If they need help finding something, even if it's just money, or hey, we need this on social media, or we want to really publicize this paper. It's like, yeah, let me do that. Let me do that. I can do that so you can focus on being out there and doing those surveys, or you're out there checking those camera traps, sort of thing.
And what would you say that kind of your time around Dole's in all of its forms has taught you?
Patience, lots and lots of patience, and to have a sense of humor. Um, so with the captive doles, I was so used to if you ever work with large cats, if you have the food, you have their focus. They kind of are like whatever. Same with bears. If you have the food, they'll work. Doles want you to build trust with them. I won't say a relationship. It is kind of a relationship because relationships are built on trust, but they want to know who you are, why you're here, what are you doing. Um, so it took a few weeks to get them to even come up to the fence to me to even take food. And of course, they were getting fed regardless. It would be, all right, well, they haven't come up today. And I put the food far away from the fence and then
Mhm.
closer and then closer and then closer. And eventually they kind of, okay, you're fine. And by the end of it, I could ask them to do things even without food. So with the wild doles, it wasn't much different when you're capturing them. Some days they're right near the traps and you're like, we're gonna get one, and the next day, absolutely nothing. So it's a lot of sitting and waiting in humid kind of areas, although it was really cold when we went. February's cold in Thailand, I learned. Um, the reason why I say a sense of humor is I like to say I'm a wildlife photographer. Really, I'm more of an amateur. It's fun. I like to have a camera.
Yeah,
Um, and so when we were in Thailand, I took some great photos. I was so excited to be able to share these, put them on the website, put them on social media. 3 days before I was meant to go back to the airport, or no, it was a week before the airport. I hadn't changed out my memory card. I was like, I'll do it this afternoon. And an elephant ate my camera.
no.
A wild elephant ate my camera, and then stepped on it. The memory card completely trashed. I sent it to a few different companies, and they're like, "There's no way to repair this." And I'm like, and all I could do was laugh. I'm like, well, at least it was just the camera, the data is fine for the project, which was the important stuff. The doles were okay. All the people were fine. It was just my backpack and my camera that got destroyed. I've learned sometimes, you just have to laugh at things if
Absolutely.
they don't go your way. I got stuck in Seoul Airport for 48 hours coming back from Thailand the second time. Um, I made a little fort in their sleeping area, which I got in trouble for. But again, you just kind of have to laugh. If you take things too seriously, you miss out on a lot of fun opportunities in life.
Yeah, very wise. And on the subject of wise, have you had any kind of particular mentors or influences on your career in terms of you getting to where you are today?
I've had quite a few. The first big one is actually she's on my board, Bonnie McDonald. She was my manager at the California Wolf Center when I literally first got out into this field. And she and I kind of coined the phrase, why not? It would be I'd come in and I was an intern, so obviously I'm looking at other jobs while I'm working there. And I'd be like, I don't know if I should do this application. She just looked at me, she's like, why not? It's not a yes. You don't even know if you're going to get it, but why not just do it? And that was my attitude towards applying for jobs at Madagascar and Namibia. And I got both of those and I won. I was able to. Another big one was the vet school advisor at UC Davis. So that's my alma mater. That's where I have my bachelor's of science from. And I did not have the grade point average to go to vet school, which was my ultimate goal. Was I was like, I want to be a vet. That was the only thing I knew is either you were a farmer or you were a vet. If you want to work with animals, those were the only two options. And she sits me down. She goes, you're not getting in with these grades. She goes, you need to build up your experience, though. That is your best way of getting into vet school. I was like, okay, I've worked at the dairy, I've worked at the vet school, I've worked on spay and neuter clinics. What experience are you looking for? She goes, do something that sets you apart. What's your favorite animal? I said, wolves. She goes, do an internship with wolves. Best advice I've ever gotten, because I didn't realize you can literally put wolf in internship and three places pop up on the internet in the US. So that made me realize I did not have to be a vet. There were other options out there. Um, the last real big mentor wasn't so much an individual person, but there is it's an organization, it's kind of a network called UCL, or Emerging Wildlife Conservation Leaders. And I was accepted into this program earlier on in my career. And I really did because I thought it was a great networking option. Some of the stuff they taught I thought was interesting and could help me at my job then as the manager of I moved up as a manager at the California Wolf Center. Little did I know it was going to be completely life-changing. They didn't just teach us about conservation or nonprofit work, but they also taught us about conservation work, how to start international projects, how to network with individuals, including those in our class, how to write grants, how to start a project, how to start a website, how to do social media, literally everything. I was blown away by these in-person 2 week classes, and just meeting people from all over, working with all different projects. And then to see if you're learning anything, they actually make you start a project. It's a 2 year part. Yeah, and mine was cameras for conservation to help clouded leopards in Southeast Asia. I was like, this is perfect. And I just didn't realize so many people in this. You get this idea that like no one wants help. Everyone's doing everything and they're fine. And I'm realizing a lot of people there want to do these projects. They just didn't know how to start or where to start. So that was probably the most eye-opening was, you hear of these amazing projects, WWF, World Wildlife Fund, you have, you know, SOS, Save Our Species, and it's like these huge organizations. How did they start? Where do I even begin? And it's like, with that first step is basically what UBL says. That first step, have a mission. What is your mission? What's your focus? Where are you going to work? The how will come later is basically what I learned. And it's true. You figure out the how based off of the feedback you get from those first steps. And learning that from UCL and having the support of my classmates really is what made me take that final step of creating the Dhole Conservation Fund. And of course, my mother has put up with me in all this craziness, from the 100 pets we had when I was a kid to moving halfway across the world to work with African wild dogs. So she's been amazing through it all.
Yeah, certainly. I think obviously it's easy for it to be assuming that we're getting into conservation for the animals, and we absolutely are, but it can't be overstated the importance of networking and the strong
Mhm.
connections you have with the people that are ultimately cut from the same cloth.
Yeah.
So, Chelsea, just to finish the episode up, we're just gonna have some quick fire questions to see the episode out. And I know you said you're well travelled. So, are there any dream species that you either have seen in the wild, or anything that you've got left that you'd love to see in the wild?
So what I mean, two species I'd love to see out in the wild. One would be leopard shark, not leopard sharks. I have those back home. Whale sharks. So either swimming with them or on a boat, whichever causes the least amount of issues to the whale
Hmm.
sharks. And then jaguars would be a great one to see out in the wild. Would be huge. Ones I have seen were dholes. I got to see dholes out in the wild, and African wild dogs out in the wild. I've got to see those twice. So those were two big ones. And then I got very lucky to see a pack of 9 Mexican gray wolves, which was a species I worked with for 5 years out in Arizona, which that was a huge, huge bucket list animal. So, but yeah, everyone's always like, those are really boring for like all the species, And I'm like, I'm sorry. I still am a fangirl like everyone else. I like to see the fancy animals too.
Mm.
So
And obviously you've mentioned that you've been fortunate enough to be well travelled with Madagascar and Zimbabwe and obviously Southeast Asia. But is there any other places that you'd really love to see?
So this is going to sound completely lame. So actually, 2 years ago, I finished the bucket list of visiting all 7 continents. So that was a big dream. The next list is to finish all 50 states, and my last one is Hawaii. So I would love to see Hawaii.
Fair.
And then there's Eastern Canada. There's this thing where you get to be on puffin patrol. So the lights cause the puffins to go into the city. I would love to go there and see the puffins and help move them back out to the
Yeah.
ocean where they're supposed to go.
So of the states that you've visited,
Mhm.
which ones have stood out to you the most?
I really, and this is gonna sound weird, I really fell in love with Arkansas in
Mhm.
the Ozarks. So it's a smaller mountain range. Loved the kind of, I was in a very small little town called Eureka Springs, working for a large cat rescue. So it was a very kind of weird area, but I loved it. Fell in love with Maine, but a little too rural for me to want to live.
Sure.
Minnesota, as far north as you can go, there's a place called the Boundary Waters where you can literally paddle canoes and find campsites and not hear another person for 3 or 4 days. And then the last place I really fell in love with was Montana. Big rural areas. You got wolves, you got grizzly bears, you got mountain lions. So lots of wildlife, beautiful scenery. Very cold, but
Yeah.
otherwise it's not bad.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. There's certainly, I think that question might have more been for me because there's certainly a lot of states that I want to visit. But yeah, yeah, yeah.
I
And to be
definitely
fair,
recommend the Yellowstone region, but avoid school time. So October, November is a great time to come. Bears might be hibernating, but so are the tourists.
I like that. I like that. So when you're, say not working, it's quite often something that you do take home with you. But when you're trying to unwind and kind
Mhm.
of take a step away from conservation for a bit, how do you keep busy, or what do you do to relax?
I do archery a lot, so I like to just shoot a bow. It's just for target. I have a few pets, so I actually have 5 ferrets and a dog. I have dogs. I have normal pets too, but I like to just kind of have the ferrets out, play with them. They run around. Goofy little critters.
They
All
are,
the
yeah.
species I've worked with, they're some of my favorite. Like I said, I have dogs. Love going hiking, so still outdoors. I spend most of my weekends out in, I'm currently in Eastern Washington and exploring that region. But that's kind of my big, hobbies. If I had any other than writing articles and social media posts.
Sure. And
Oh,
and on the on the topic of social media posts, how can our listeners keep up to date with the work of the Dhole Conservation Fund?
so we do have our website is kind of our home hub. It's just Doles, DHOLES, uh, .org, or as we say, dholes, because
Yeah.
most people always otherwise misspell it. And that kind of, we try and keep that up to date as much as possible. But of course, day-to-day updates are on our Instagram and Facebook, which is just Dhole Conservation Fund. We always encourage people, leave comments, please be interactive. We have a lot of people that'll comment on things that they're like, well, I heard it was this way. And all that does is make me go back through and see, have things changed? Things are
Hmm.
always changing. I am a single person. I cannot be the wealth of knowledge for everything as it's happening. So we always encourage that. We love people to share our content. We try and make some things funny and throughout the week kind of vary it up for different audiences to be able to find something they can relate to.
Awesome. And lastly, then, what is one thing, if there is just one thing, that you think our listeners should take away from today's episode?
Never underestimate your own voice. So it's funny, a lot of people think you have to make big steps and big gestures to try and make a change in the world. But really, when I look at some of our biggest conservation success stories, it's happened with a kid telling their parent, I'm interested in this, or I hope I get to see this when I'm older. When we start talking, we realize that our time here is so short that we really need to also be thinking about the future. If you can't think about the future for yourself, think about it for future generations. Um, so I've learned literally just from my own story and my own self that sometimes I literally said, I'm interested in dholes. And that my managers at the safari park was, how can we support this? You need time off to go to Thailand, but you don't have the vacation. We'll let you go. Or you want to, you want some photographs to use or some of the, it's funny. We get so nervous about asking for things or even saying things. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be an ask. It can literally just be, I'm interested in. And it sticks with people's heads. Now it also backfires because now people know I work with bears primarily, and all of a sudden I have 12 bear shirts in my wardrobe. Didn't happen when I said I was interested in working with dholes because there's no dhole shirts at that time. But yeah, I always tell people never underestimate your own voice. Be it conservation, human social issues, whatever is important to you, use your voice.
Yeah, a great point to finish up on there. So Chelsea, thank you so much today for coming on the podcast and sharing your passion and knowledge and your experience with conservation. It's been very enlightening and I think we've definitely managed to put a spotlight on a species that I'm now obsessed with. I think they're really, really cool, and that's just from listening to you talk about them. So I'll be sure to. I'm pretty sure I've got the Canids of the World book that you mentioned about earlier. So I'll be sure to go and have a look at that half page.
They've come out with the newer editions, a bit longer now for the dhole. The old one was black and white, no dust cover. So I'm happy to see the newer one has a bit more about them.
Yeah, I'll definitely be sure to go and have a read. Chelsea, we wish you all the support in the rest of your career, and we'll be sure to keep up to date with all things dhole and following the work of the Dhole Conservation Fund. And we'll probably make a cocktail or two on World Dhole Day. So thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
A massive thank you to Chelsea once again for all her hard work in conservation and her time on the Conservationists Assemble podcast today. But as always, a huge thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. If you did enjoy this episode, please like, share and review or rate the podcast, as it helps us to keep improving and spreading the word on the conservation efforts taking place around the world. Don't forget that you can always follow and interact with the podcast on Instagram, Facebook or via email. I've been your host, Johnny Bloxham, and I hope to see you all next time.